What's up, y'all? My name is Travis Handler. I'm the chair for Dome Leadership Educators. Super excited to continue with our interview series on the way up this fall. First guest I've got, I'm really stoked about. I really appreciate him taking the time for being here. Natan Santos is the co-founder of R.House Club clothing line, the co-founder of Egol Collective, recent Dartmouth grad. Congratulations, by the way. And according to your Instagram bio, he does marketing with Converse. Thank you for being on.
Appreciate it. Thank you for having me.
So we'll start with just your background. So where'd you grow up, go to high school? Kind of take me through, you know, your life story.
Yeah, absolutely. So I was born and raised in Boston. I went to high school, New Mission High School. It's in Hyde Park. So I'm raised in Hyde Park, and it's a neighborhood in Boston. But yeah, I mean, a lot of it, inner city kid. My mom's from Puerto Rico. My dad's from the Dominican Republic. So heavy like Latinx influence in my household. Um, and like Afro Caribbean, like that was what we identify as, and like what the culture I grew up around. Pretty like the neighborhood, pretty much the same. But yeah, so I went to, it was a public high school. Went there. Amazing staff, people who, like, all the staff looked like me. It was exciting to be around such a dope environment. And they really pushed every single individual kid to like, reach for new heights. So they, in high school, I was acclimated in a bunch of different programs. I was doing arts and leadership and, entrepreneurship, all that kind of stuff in high school. And my high school was perfect for supporting those kind of things, like not necessarily internally, but they were with their partners. And then, yeah, then I was able to attend Dartmouth. Yeah, and then the rest is history. I don't know if you want me to go into like my time at Dartmouth right now,
Yeah,
but
no, please do. Please do.
absolutely. So I studied sociology at Dartmouth. I went in wanting to be an econ major, and then soon realized that like that wasn't what I wanted. I think that there was this big emphasis on like trying to make money, and this big emphasis on going to a school like Dartmouth and graduating, like, oh, you need to be in Wall Street or whatever the case may be, doing consulting or whatever, investment banking. Which, like, no knock to that. Like, of course, that's a good career path for whoever was interested in it, but I think that just wasn't where my heart lied. In high school, I was doing a lot. Like Eagle, I started in high school. Before R.House, I had a clothing line called Son of King. And the whole purpose of R.House was to like inspire a movement. Like the logos was Broken Shackles. And the whole premise behind it was like wanting to remind people that we come from kings. I mean, and the kings and queens. And the idea of like Natan, my name Natan is the third son of King David. And that's where I got my name from. So I think that was the like influence behind the name, and like the influence behind me wanting to do what I did. So like in school, I couldn't really find what I was interested in studying, to be honest. Like I never really found, um, I've always been interested in so many things, and I didn't really find the major that would align with what I wanted, especially a liberal arts school. But I did fall in love with sociology, and I loved how interconnected everything was. So I was a major in sociology with a minor in markets, economy, and management. And essentially that is like how the intersection with how like societies influence businesses and businesses influence society and like all this other stuff, and thinking logically about, we want to have progress in the world. We want to have all this stuff, but realizing that all the nuances behind how these social structures are created help me make more informed decisions on thinking about solutions to some of the problems we have in our society. It's like it's so multi-layered, and I think that I really enjoyed that piece of what I was studying there.
That's profound. And so I do want to follow up. And this is a good segue, actually. My introduction to you virtually was through your clothing line, R.House Club, and I'm friends with Garrison. That's how I got plugged with that. And you mentioned earlier, you made an allusion to the fact that some of the expressions of your understanding of the way that the world's interconnected was through R.House Club. Can you go through kind of the foundation of that clothing line? What served as the impetus for that?
Yeah, absolutely. Um, so I was coming up on, so like again, like I started with Son of King, and that clothing line, I think, it was like I started when I was 14. So here I am, like 14 years old, coming with this idea. And now looking back on it, like I think it still would hold its own today, but I think I outgrew it in the sense that it didn't really tie in everything I wanted to tie in. Um, and at the time, I had two other roommates. I had two roommates. There was three of us, and those are the people who I do R.House with. And we were sitting down one day just talking about how we were really frustrated with like just the overall industry, right? So like you go to the mall and you think you're buying um like Louis V or whatever the case may be, and all these big brands like Fenty, like Rihanna, all that stuff is under one fashion house, like LVMH. So that to me was frustrating because like I would love to support someone like Rihanna, for example, because she's a Black woman and like wanting to all the progress that she does. And for sure, I would still support her. But then I was getting frustrated at the fact that regardless of the case may be, like it was still going to this big conglomerate, LVMH. So I think that was the premise that we had. Where like there's so many gatekeepers to this world, and to me, I think I was really frustrated by all these big companies taking stories and culture from the root and then selling it back to individuals or like selling it to other people without having the integrity to say where it came from. Um, so I think that was the idea behind it. Um, and so we're sitting down talking, and I think that we've always had a passion for like we have these deep conversations all the time with each other about like, oh, society, like what happens if society did this or did that, or have you ever noticed like some of our collections are informed by our conversations. So like our collection faces, for example, was like this psychological research that we were doing that was based on like, oh, when you look at someone's face, that's when you get the most brain activity. So like your brain shows the most activity when it's trying to register a new face. So we were like, oh, that's a cool collection. So let's just like put a bunch of faces on clothes, and see like what the interaction is there, and just overall playing with that. And going back again, like R.House, the whole point of it was to create this this clothing line, and I don't want to say clothing line because I feel like that's so limiting because we want to eventually do a
Sure.
bunch of other stuff with it. Um, but like that's what it was. It was a place where you could come to our house. That's what the R stands for. Someone you said out loud is like our house, and it stands for roots. So come back to our house, um, and have that integrity where like the stories are going to be authentic, and we want it to be inviting. Like we want other people eventually to come in and like tell their own stories through our platform, collaborations, whatever the case may be, in an authentic way.
That's awesome. And I mean, thinking about even some of the other designs, the Atlas woman's another one that sticks out to me. The imagery there, and I think that's what I was taken aback. And I'll use this brief 15 seconds to promo your I mean, beyond even a clothing line, your influence, the sphere of your influence there. I was just taken aback at like how complex it was, especially that image, and I think that's really awesome. And so transitioning a little bit into, you talked about how you took leadership classes in high school. What leadership skills has your work with R.House required? What skills have you developed? What did it necessitate of you?
Yeah, absolutely. And I hope I've been answering all your other questions. Like,
No, absolutely,
okay,
absolutely.
I feel like I was rambling a little bit.
No,
Uh,
no, it's not cookie cutter at all. Don't worry.
um, I think leadership skills. I mean, when you like a small business is one of those things where you just like do everything.
Yeah,
Like you're responsible for customer service and shipping and designing, and for like we outsource photography and stuff, but like creative direction and all the other stuff, like all those things, even like taxes and all those things that we have to fill out and do, that's all on us. So I think some of the leadership qualities that come there is just like being proactive and like constantly doing research,
yeah.
um constantly like being on top of things there. But I think one of the ones that people don't often, or at least me, that I didn't think of right away, that I developed from R.House is just a sense of empathy. I think that one is we don't tell any stories that are not apparent in our life, right? Like we don't tell any stories that didn't happen to us. However, it's oftentimes we don't want to put out a story where we're speaking for a particular group of people. So I think, being mindful of those stories that we tell, the audience that we are trying to like reach and things like that. Like we are constantly trying to be empathetic and thinking of ways that like what we're putting out is sensitive, authentic, and also just mindful of what we're trying to portray. But I think, at the end of the day too, is that I think one of the coolest parts is like inspiring other people to do their stuff. Like, we're not that big and we're not big at all, but like hearing other people saying like, oh, I was inspired by your piece or I was inspired by that, like constantly um reminding myself like why we do this. And I think that, that's some of, I guess, is one of the, like, not so specific ways of leadership. I mean, I don't even realize I'm doing that most of the time. Like inspiring these people is, it's more like I just want to tell a story and kind of like dive in deep, and people get inspired by it and do their own thing. And I think that's ultimately the end goal with what we do too.
That was awesome. That's and I can honestly, hearing you talk about it, I can hear some of the overlap and why you were interested in sociology as well, and kind of some of those deeper interpersonal connections and the way that something even like clothing can signify that. So, what would be, before we transition? What do you think is your favorite piece that you've designed for R.House?
Mm.
Do you have one?
It's very hard because they're all like, they're all our babies. And I think that at the end of the day, it's an evolution. Like every single piece, like if you go on our Instagram, every single piece from the start to where we are now, every single piece that I designed, like, with my team, like we all design together and it's a collaborative process, which I love. Like you can see the influence of our style in one piece, which I think is extremely difficult to do. Um, but I would say my favorite piece is always the next one. My favorite piece is always the next one. It's always is I get excited. I get excited about a piece. I fall in love with it. But by the time the audience have seen what we put out, we're already working on the next collection. So it's oftentimes I don't even get to appreciate it that much. And with that, I'll plug the next collection because it's coming out like a month or so. But like these pieces, I can honestly say are like nothing like our other collections, and like have really thought out. And it's about this collection is about like shining a light on mental health and stuff like that. So like some of the pieces are informed by that, and I think this is one of the most emotional drops that we've done. So
That's awesome. I will await that anxiously. That's gonna be really cool. Um, all right, so transitioning a little bit to the Egol Collective, you mentioned that you started that in high school, which is pretty impressive. What was the kind of the start of that, I guess? What motivated you to do that?
for sure, I mean, Ego. So it was started out as a fashion show. Um, there was at the time there was four of us, my friend Reggie, Nas, and Bradley, and we all come from Nas and Reggie come from, I think they're both from Dorchester, so all neighborhoods in Boston. I was in Hyde Park, and then there's a neighborhood called, the further away from Boston, it's like 30 minutes, called Brockton, and that's where Bradley was from. And we were all doing individual projects. Like we were all like, in Brockton, Bradley was doing his work, like he's running for mayor now, and like Reggie was doing his thing in Dorchester. And we were all had our separate brands and doing our separate things that had a similar like messaging. And the whole messaging behind it was like, again, to try to create spaces for the youth, like inspire our peers and like people younger than us. Um, and yeah, one day we were sitting down and we're like, yo, let's put a collection together. Um, like let's put this collective, let's put a fashion show where we highlight, up and coming rappers and dancers and models and fashion and like just fashion designers and all that in the community. We're all like 15, 16, 14, like we're like, okay, we don't have a space. Like Boston oftentimes like gets, it doesn't have like the same allure as a New York or LA for this kind of style. Like we're also pushed to the side. We're known for like, Matt Damon or whatever, or like the town. So like, like in our sports teams, like people
Yeah.
don't know us for what we do, like for arts and creativity. So we didn't have, there's no space, there's no infrastructure here, especially for like inner city kids of color. Where like we don't have spaces. So that was the premise behind it. We were like, let's create a collective where we're empowering other kids and our peers to just do whatever the hell they want to do and like put on a show. And that was the birth of it. And then crazy reception. So many people came out, like so much love. And then from there, we just kept going. We did different events. That's when we were like, okay, a fashion show is cool, but we still want to do stuff in our communities. Like we still want to stand on what we say we stand on. So we like made goodie bags and gave them out to homeless people in our area. We built school benches and gardens. And then from there, we then did another show, and we did a young professional panel. So it was like professionals of color in Boston who were like in different industries, CEOs of companies, like lawyers and all that. We had them come out to the Museum of Contemporary Art in Boston, Seaport. And we paired them up with high school kids who were interested in those fields. And essentially, so the reason why it's a collective is because it sounds crazy, but we don't have a complete direction. It's just like whatever we feel like we want to do in the moment where we want to tackle an issue, is what we do.
That's awesome. And one of the things that you highlighted, I wanted to circle back to. You mentioned the importance of the connection between equity and space, giving especially kids their space. Can you elaborate a little bit on why that's important for having opportunities and stuff, and as it relates to equity?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, space is huge, because I think that, if especially for like young creatives or anybody just in general, like you're in your little bubble in your neighborhood and your community doing your thing. But I think having access to space is important because it's visibility. Someone gets to see you doing something and can invest in you. And I think, a lot of the community that I'm from and the kids around where I come from don't necessarily have that space. So they're not left with many options to, what they want to do in life and have access to things. I mean, I think that that's huge. Um, and just having a space allows them like, okay, maybe they don't become a rapper. Like maybe they don't become a designer or a poet, or they don't do that for their career, but at least having the ability to explore that, at least having the space to express themselves in that regard, I think is extremely important for just like equity and being able to truly excel. And I think that ultimately, like just the creativity, the arts, because there's oftentimes they tell you, oh, we can't do that, you can't do that, or there's no future in that, there's no progression in that. And ultimately, like at the end of the day, we're constantly told that, and then we believe it. And then we feel so limited, and then what are our options? I mean, like our schools are not the best, not the place. We don't also find spaces in our schools because they're underfunded. So where do these people have this outlet to really express themselves, to really, find that community? But most importantly, just like one, find a supportive community, but two, also find the resources and access to really, pour into their futures. So I think, that's the reason why space is so important, because, even now in Boston is being gentrified, we're losing all these spaces. And I think that's one of the cool parts about every single event that Egol has done. We intentionally try to do it in like the richest, most affluent neighborhoods in Boston. Not because it's a shot at, the lower fund. No, it's like we are going to take up space in this space. You're trying to push us out? No, we're going to take up space. Like you can't push us out. Um, and I think that's part of the importance of like keeping the integrity and culture and just like, making sure people, have access and don't lose that.
Absolutely. Um, and so now speaking as somebody, so I go to Doane University in Crete, Nebraska. As you can imagine, I identify with I am from a social group that occupies space implicitly, and always has. And so how can I and other people who look like me as a leader on my campus work to not only create space for individuals and groups that have been, invisible in the past, but just to increase visibility in that way?
Absolutely. I think the most important thing is like constantly giving out your platform for whatever the case may be, like whatever platform you may have or your peers or whatever the case, like allowing like to create a platform for those individuals, but also partnering with organizations who are already doing that. I think oftentimes like there's so many organizations pop up and like they're all doing the same work, which is great. It's amazing. Like we need a bunch of organizations doing the same work, but I think if there's a community or already an organization who's trying to create space, promote them, support them, and invest in them, because they're the closest to those people, and two, it helps push those efforts even more. Um, I think that constantly the word ally comes up so often. And I think that I've been thinking more deeply about what that means because all this allyship, but like institutionally, like these issues are so deeply rooted. Um, the wealth gaps, regardless of how much allyship is happening, the wealth gap is extending year after year after year, and it's only getting worse. Um, so I think like the infrastructure and like pushing against policy, trying to get your peers together to push policy, to push, all these luxury apartments are popping up all over Boston, right? Like no matter how much allyship there is, those individuals are still not gonna be able to afford the $2,000, $3,000 one-bedroom studio luxury apartments. So I think that, but the only way that that can be stopped is through policy and, because people from marginalized groups oftentimes don't have access, or people don't, like politicians don't necessarily listen to them or whatever. I think as a unit, as together, we can push policy and create, change in that way, where we constantly allow, creating space there, that being on the forefront of policy. But most importantly, just like also giving out, sometimes if you have a space, just give it out. I mean? Like give out your space, once in a blue moon, to allow, these stories to be told and these people to have a place to conjugate and get their message out there.
That was fantastic. Thank you. Um, wow, I lost my place. If you'll give me just a moment here.
No, my bad.
No, that was way better than even where I was going to direct it towards. Oh, I do want to tie back to this real quick. Why is equity integral to leadership to you?
Mm.
And that one's off the cuff. I didn't give you that one before.
Yeah, no, you're good. No, you're good. I'm thinking about it. I mean, at the end of the day, like if equity isn't in the front of your mind, then like, and when you're trying to be a leader, then you're not a leader. I mean, I think that if you want to lead something, it needs to be able to empower everybody who's in the community you're potentially trying to lead. And always being mindful of, okay, are everyone's needs being met? And if they're not, then how can we get there as a collective to make sure the individual needs of every single person in this community is being met, or whatever you're leading. And I think that's one of the most important pieces. I think like just having equity in the forefront, because then the issues are always going to come up. Like issues going to come up regardless. but I think that you avoid many issues like that, or at least the issues of people feeling like they don't have a space, a voice, um, don't feel included. At the end of the day, though, it's not what I've learned in a few of the leadership roles that I'm part of is not assuming what the community needs. It's not assuming what each individual needs. It's actively asking them. It's actively having a participant, a representative of of every group or whatever, really voicing what they need and really voicing, how can this space be equitable. And I think that that's ultimately how you get there, is if you have all the voices speaking, um, and it's a leader who's like mindful of all these different community members.
Thank you.
Is
Thank
there a lot of background noise?
No, I got none on my end. Don't worry about that. Um, all right, so now we're gonna transition a little bit, and again, I definitely pulled this 100% from your Instagram bio, so you can correct the narrative here if I'm
Yeah, no
incorrect. But
worries.
you do marketing with Converse, right? What kind of drove you to get into that? What does that entail?
Yeah, so I was on this path, like I mentioned earlier. I was drinking the Kool-Aid and I was like, oh, like let me go and do like consulting or investment banking. But I was feeling so empty. Like I was feeling so uh I was like, okay, what else do I want um in life, or like what is it that inspires me? And like fashion, arts, and creativity has always inspired me. But like also social change has always inspired me. So it's like I was looking for an internship. And I just started emailing a bunch of people on LinkedIn in the sneaker industry. I was like, you know what? Let me just hit out whoever. Like Boston, although it's not a hub to most people. It is a super hub for like the sport industry and the sneaker industry. So like Reebok is here, Puma's here, New Balance is here, Converse is here. So I went down the list and I just started emailing everyone and different recruiters, and then finally, a Converse recruiter responded to me. She's like, yeah, send me your resume. Um, and then, yeah, the rest is history. I interviewed there, and then they offered me a position in North America team, the North America marketing team. Um, and I think when I got there, I was super excited because, one of the projects I was working on was how does the company respond to the Black Lives Matter movement and COVID-19? And I think like a company that's even willing to hear from how old was I? A 21-year-old kid at the like a 21-year-old about these issues, such large issues, and like wanting my perspective. I was like, wow, okay, they care. It's not just a dollar of them. It's not just a buck that they're trying to make off these communities. Um, and they really want to put their money where their mouth is. And yeah, no, and then I returned back. They gave me the return offer. So that's where I'm at now. Um, and I love my position there. I work with the All-Star team. So the All-Star team is the All-Stars, the Converse All-Stars are a collective of creative individuals. I work in North America, but this is a global thing. Um, that Converse wants to give their platform out, whether it be resources, commissioning them to be models or photographers, or pushing their stories and all these other things. Converse gives them a platform, and they're part of this community that we're all together, and like they share things amongst each other, they support each other. And the whole idea behind it is that we support these young creatives, 18 to 25, in their arts and whatever they're pushing. Sometimes as activists, sometimes it's like musicians or whatever the case may be, and we push their stories forward, we push them forward. So that's the job I'm doing right now, is finding these young creatives in these different cities, primarily in LA and New York. But we're in Toronto, Boston, Atlanta, all these places. And then we if a photo shoot comes up, I commission them for a photo shoot, and I say, come here, we would love to invite you to do the photo shoot. If there's and moving forward, eventually we want to be able to do different things with these creatives, and push their stories forward. So yeah, that's what I do there.
Would you say then that you see your role with Converse as almost a continuation of the empowering you were doing with R.House Club and with Egol Collective before that.
Absolutely, 100%.
Yeah.
100%. I think that, so it's interesting. Like, I didn't apply for this job. Um, so at the time there was a like reorganization happening at Converse. Um, so they promised me a position, but they didn't promise me what position.
Right.
So I got a position in like July when I started in July. In June, I got the position in June. They were like, "Oh yeah, you're gonna be influencer, uh, influencer and culture specialist," and I'm like, "Okay, like I don't know what that means. Like,
Yeah.
what does that mean? Like, what am I gonna be doing? Am I gonna be working with Tyler?" Like, I was like, "Oh, that's sick. Like, okay, I work with Tyler, whatever the case may be." And then when I got in, they were like, "Oh yeah, this is the community you're gonna be focused on." And that to me was like super. I was like, okay, the universe is aligning, and like it's all making sense now. Everything I've ever done to get to this point, now I have the infrastructure of such a large corporation behind me, allowing me to also create space for other creators, which is what like I've been trying to do since like I was a kid. So
Yeah.
I think that to me was super exciting that I had the support now of a brand. And of course, like you have all this bureaucracy and still a corporate company, so there's all these things, all these ideas that I would love to push that the progress is slow,
Yeah.
but what I love about it is that they're willing to do it. It's not that they're not willing to do it. They're hear me out, but it's just following the steps in the infrastructure and getting all the levels of approval that's necessary for being able to push some of these narratives and push some of these goals forward.
I think that the through line is incredible, and it actually tracks pretty well with your trajectory there. And one of the other things I wanted to ask about that I think is really cool, that is not even something that I was completely cognizant of until maybe 6 months ago, a year ago. Whenever Garrison actually put me onto your clothing line, because he and I had an interview probably about this time last year where he was talking about, and I promise I'm getting somewhere. Nobody wants to hear me rambling, but
You're good. You're good.
well, he was talking about one of the easiest forms of empowerment is supporting minority-owned businesses, and especially the influence that fashion can have on that. And so I wanted to ask you, what do you see as the connection between fashion and social change, and fashion and equity?
Mm. I think there's a Giorgio Armani quote that he says that fashion is nothing but a lens in a reflection of society and where society is. And I think that is so funny because it did not get approved, or I could have maybe, but when COVID happened, it was so hard for me to get all these levels of approval. But I wanted to write a thesis on the sociology of fashion, and more specifically, how fashion influences social movements. Um, Going back, like women used to wear long skirts to their ankles to play tennis. That is ridiculous, right? Like that
Yeah,
is ridiculous.
yeah,
Um, and then you have like, just the first one, like she cuts it down to her knee, and oh, it's this big thing. But after that, it was so empowering, and it influenced. Obviously, there was all these movements going on at the same time, so you can't credit all that to that. But it influences it. It contributes to the larger movement of like women empowerment. And then you have like counterculture coming like the 60s, and you have people dressing up in drag and all this other stuff, and it's all a performance, right? And it's the performance to push another narrative, push society's expectations of what it means to be for a particular group or whatever the case may be. I think constantly, like even if you look at the Black Panther, and the Black Panthers were wearing their berets and their military gear and all that, like again, it was almost like they were wearing a costume, but to say a costume sounds like that they're not serious about it, but it's this you understand that it becomes a staple, it becomes a statement. And constantly, like we constantly see an evolution. You have like Kid Cudi wear a dress on stage, Young Thug wear a dress, and it's pushing other narrative. Now it's pushing other narratives, and it's pushing back against this toxic masculinity and what does it mean to be a man and what does it mean to, it creates so much space, right? And especially a person like Kid Cudi who constantly advocates for mental health and especially amongst men and saying like, men have the highest suicide rate. So like, how can men talk about this? How can like men cry too? Like all that stuff. So like him wearing a dress is so much more powerful, like bringing that full circle. And I think that's oftentimes like so like it's what I love about fashion, what I love about social movement is the fact that it makes a statement without having to make a statement. And I think in the first 15 seconds of someone meeting you, they instantly judge you without you saying a word. And what they're thinking or what they're saying is purely based on what you're wearing, your appearance, your hair, your, whatever the case may be, is based on that. And I think that to me is just so powerful that fashion can tell this story, that clothing can tell this story. And I think that, it makes people uncomfortable. I did an investment internship, and I would pull up in like the most outrageous clothing, and the whole purpose of it was like, no, you guys, like, this isn't cookie cutter. Like, I can still do the same work you guys are doing without having to look boring as hell. And like that was the behind it, like, pushing that. And I think that there's a space for equity, there's a space for social movement amongst fashion. And Garrison is right, like supporting these young brands are so important because it tells an authentic story. Like I got pissed off this morning because I saw Balenciaga drop some sweatpants that had a boxer attached to it. The sweatpants were sagging, so you see the boxer sweatpant. So the sweatpants sits on your waist. The boxer sits on your waist, but the sweatpants sits below it. And it's like, yo, you just gentrified sagging. Like you just gentrified like a whole thing of what we were doing. So like that pissed me off because at the end of the day, they're taking something that was frowned upon, that they frowned, like whoever you want to say they frowned upon it and took the culture and then sold it. And then like obviously people who can afford Balenciaga, like people who are affluent in particular groups. So then they're appropriating this initial, where the culture came from. And in my opinion, I think, supporting these young brands and supporting these smaller brands and these minority businesses, you allow them to stay afloat, but also it just has the authenticity. There's authenticity behind these stories that are being told and what people are buying. And it's just being a mindful consumer.
Yeah, absolutely. I hope that you at some point can find the time to put that research together. I would definitely read that, the connection between. Is there any chance that you end up actually writing that at some point?
I want to. I think, now is more expensive because I don't have the research. But like, so I have to pay for all the
yeah
documents and everything. But I really, really want to because I think it's super important. I work with an organization, and I think you actually you found them. I worked for I helped this organization touch BBC. Touch BBC. The Black Breast Cancer Alliance, and like again, like I make clothing for them. This like I do graphics and everything for them, but I also I make clothing that is intentionally supposed to, when someone's walking in the street, like, whoa, like, oh crap, like there's an issue with Black breast cancer. Oh yes, there is an issue. Like, it's a conversation starter. And that's ultimately what it is just to start the conversation without having to necessarily say a word. Because if I'm walking in the street, no one's gonna ask me what I believe in. No one's gonna stop you and be like, hey, what issues are you like trying to fix right now? Like no one's gonna have that. But if they see me walking in the street and they're like, oh shit, like this guy's wearing, sorry, I mean to swear. If this guy's wearing this shirt, that says, has a crazy statistic about Black breast cancer, like then they're like, oh wow, there's an issue. They may be curious and do more research on it later on. But yeah, I think like there's so much there. We made the American Excellence tee, and the American Excellence tee, like it looked grim. We had blood on the shirt, not real blood, but we had, blood on the shirt. and the whole American excellence drenched in black blood, like that, didn't need to say anything. Like that set speaks for itself. And I remember wearing it the day we did the photo shoot. It was like 6 of us, and we're wearing it in downtown Boston. And the horrified looks that we would get, I was like, I loved it. That's the reaction I wanted, because while you're living your happy dandy life, like, this is a reality for people. So if you're uncomfortable for 30 seconds, well, like, congratulations, welcome to our world for being uncomfortable, like, 90% of the time. So I think that was, that again is some of how, like, influenced by, fashion, and you not needed to say much.
That was incredible. Thank you. So we're going to kind of transition to a wrap up here. I guess first and foremost, and a lot of this will harken back to what you've already talked about, but what advice would you impart upon the leaders of my generation? I'm probably through two. Well, I guess I'm only a year younger than you, but maybe the students who are a couple years younger than me, who are looking to, create a just and equitable world. How can we lead in a way that cultivates that?
Absolutely. Um, um, I think that there's so many people trying to do a lot of things and care about so many issues, and that's exhausting. I think, like, Gen Z is taxed with so many issues: climate change, issues before, generations before us were issued with, racism has always existed, all this stuff has always existed, but on our phone we're constantly bombarded with, like, infographics and all this stuff. And it's important to know about all these issues, but what I would recommend is that, unplug at times, continue to be informed by these issues, but really find one that you love, find one thing you care about, and put all your efforts into caring about that thing. Become obsessed about that thing. If climate change is your thing, become obsessed with climate change. Because you're still potentially solving all these other issues in your pursuit of climate change, right? Like, if you're trying to influence climate change, who's affected most by climate change? These smaller countries who do not have the resource, who are constantly hit by, hurricanes, or whatever the case may be. So if you're focused on an issue like climate change, you're inadvertently fixing, you may inadvertently be fixing all these other issues that also you care about, like race and equity and food deserts and all this other stuff. Like, if you're focused on one thing, you might potentially, be solving all these other issues or contributing to the solution to these other issues. So I think, as the word of advice that I would give for leadership, is just fall in love with whatever you fall in love with. Like, you don't even need to solve an issue. If what you love is screenwriting and movies, and that's what you want to do, then do that, and do it to the best of your ability. Become a nerd, become a geek about that thing, fall in love with that thing, because you're going to push society forward. You're going to push the world forward. When we were in quarantine, bored as hell, we needed those screenwriters more than ever. Like, that's just, find the thing that you love and dive into it, even if it may not pay out, even if it feels like it's not going to have all the money. Once you fall in love with it and you really focus on that thing, you become a leader in that space. And you don't need to, there's not a one size fits all for a leader. I think it's like becoming a leader in your space. Focus on your thing and just make sure it's the best damn thing that you're doing. Like, make sure, like, if you want to be a designer, then you're the best damn designer out there. Like, and it's not comparing. Don't compare yourself. But I'm saying, like, always be better than the person you were yesterday and the designer you were yesterday. That's why I said earlier, like, yeah, my favorite piece is the next piece, because I think that I'm always trying to outdo myself, because it's what I care about, is what I'm geeking out about at the moment. And it's all things, I love home design and furniture, whatever the case may be, but, find that lane and just, like, dominate that lane.
Thank you. That's awesome. So what's on the horizon for you? You alluded to a new line drop in a month from now,
Mm-hmm.
for R.House Club. Anything else? You're just, I mean, obviously, I know you're pretty stoked about that, but
Yeah, I mean, there's so much, man. There's like so much. I think that um, I also have my own creative endeavors, like things that I'm like working on. Like, I make furniture and stuff. So like doing my own furniture, continue to help touch the organization, push their messaging forward. I think, one of the biggest things is like awareness and like even bring it up to the forefront. Like breast cancer is an issue and there's so many people talking about it, but I would love for people to talk about how different breast cancer affects Black women and like the disparities in that because they're huge. Um, so I think that putting my efforts towards that, continue to tell stories that are maybe are not always fashion related. Continue to tell stories about people who look like me, um, in different facets. And continually my work with Converse, I think eventually I would love to be in a space where like I have more influence in design work at Converse and like have influence on how that is done. So I think that's part of the trajectory of my career too, is like working more creatively with like the garments and the pieces that are put together. Um yeah, and then I think like continually trying to just like influence change wherever I can, constantly doing events for my community. Um I have this upcoming show on October 8th. And again, it's similar to what I did in high school, but like obviously much more large scale because we have more money, more influence, whatever the case may be now. So again, local artists are coming to display their work and we're doing it in like, a rooftop in downtown Boston, which is like amazing that we were able to get this space. But again, like, that's what's coming October 9th and it's constantly pushing these narratives forward, these stories forward. And always excited for the next thing. I'm always waiting for the next thing to smack me across the face, like, oh, do this now. I love keeping myself occupied with stuff.
awesome. Well, thank you so much. Again, for those watching, this is Natan Santos. I won't even go through the plethora of things you've done because I think that we've touched on it well here. So I really appreciate you giving me the time and talking with me today.
Absolutely, man. I appreciate you having me. And honestly, like, if anybody's watching this and like, interested in any of the things that I'm doing, like whether it be Converse related or whether fashion design, whatever, or just curious about arts and creativity and space, like, I want to open up myself and I'll probably give you my contact, like open up myself to like email or like text or whatever if people have any like questions that they would love to ask.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much, and I'm sure I'll be talking with you soon. You have a good day.
Thank you too.